In this video, I'd like to explain service providers a little bit more. If you've been following along, then now your package contains an example service provider with this content. This class extends package service provider, which in its turn extends service provider, which is provided by Laravel. A service provider is a class that can register various things as Laravel boots up. Service providers are not package specific. You'll find them in your project as well. Let's now go to a vanilla Laravel project. You can see that in a normal Laravel application, there's a providers directory which already contains some service providers. Let's open up this one, and you can see that this one is basically empty. It has a boot method and a register method, and both of them will be called when Laravel boots up. When Laravel is booting, the first function that will be called is register. At this point, all of the service providers are being called for the very first time. So when executing some functionality, there isn't any guarantee that other service providers have executed as well. Next up, Laravel will call boot. So at this point, probably all low-level services in Laravel have been booted up. In normal circumstances, it's quite common to only put stuff in boot. But using our package skeleton, you don't even need to know the difference between register and boot. We'll go over that in a minute. Let's first take a look at the app.config file. And when we scroll a little bit down, then you can see a section on providers. And here, all Laravel's own service providers are being loaded. There also are a couple of application service providers that are those classes here. And there are also package service providers, which is currently empty. Nowadays, it isn't that common anymore to register package service providers yourself, as there is a way to auto-load them. And in our skeleton, that auto-discovery is already configured. I've already talked about this in the previous video. It's this extra key. Laravel will register any provider that you mention here automatically. Okay, let's go back to the example service provider that is in our package. This service provider isn't a normal service provider, but a package service provider. The goal of the package service provider is to make it very easy to register various resources in a package. It hides Laravel's low-level methods to do stuff and provides an easier API. In a package service provider, a package can be configured in the configure package method. It gives you an instance of package that you can use to configure. You can give your package a name, and this is a name that will be used in various resources. We'll dive into details of that a little bit later. And then you can register stuff like this. You can say this package has a config file, or this package has views, or has a migration, or has command. And if you call a method like hasConfig file, and if you call a method like hasConfig file, then the package service provider will do all of the low-level stuff for you. We'll have a separate video on config files, but I'll already spoil that this method will load up this configuration file and it will also make it publishable, which is what you want in the majority of cases. You won't find this file in your repository. I've just copied it here for an example. This is an old-style service provider, and I've temporarily added it here so you can see some of the stuff that package service provider does for you. So here we have that hasConfig file. If you call that method, what happens under the hood are two things. First, the config file will be made publishable, and we use Laravel's low-level publishes method for that. And it will also load up that configuration file using merge config from. But using our package service provider, you don't need to know these two methods at all, as hasConfig file will just call them for you. If you want to know more about Laravel's native methods to register stuff, head over to the package development page in the Laravel documentation. It has some good examples on how to do this stuff manually. I think using a package service provider is an easier way to register stuff, and in the remainder of the course, we're going to use these methods. This package service provider isn't native to Laravel. It is a package that my team and I have created, and you can find the documentation in this repo on GitHub. You can see that it was already downloaded a lot of times, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of these methods will one day be ported to Laravel itself. Okay, let's head back to our skeleton. I'm going to remove this old service provider as this file was only there to show you some of the old code. And let's turn our attention to the tests. In the previous video, I've already said that we use Orchestra to have an entire Laravel application at our disposal during the tests. I want to give an example to drive that point. Let's go to our example test. Inside of this test, you can use any Laravel specific functionality. Let's try reading a config file. So I'm going to dd config database. So we're going to read the database config. And let's run this test now. And sure enough, I get the output of a database config file. So these are the values of the database config file of the application that Orchestra created for us. Let's do something else Laravel specific. In our service provider, we've also registered a command. And this command does nothing, it just comments out all done and returns a successful result. My directories seem to have closed here. Let's open it up. Here's that command. Let's write a little test for that command. In a Laravel project, you can test out commands using the artisan helper. If you use PHP unit, you can do this artisan, but we're using pest here, so I'm going to use the artisan helper function that pest provides. Let's call our example command and assert that it has a successful response. Let's run the test again. And sure enough, we get green. So we're actually calling this class. Let me put a little dd statement here, calling the command. And sure enough, this command is being called. The point that I'm trying to make is that in our tests, we can use any Laravel specific functionality that we want. Writing tests for a Laravel package is just the same as writing tests for a Laravel application. In our skeleton, we use pest tests, but if you prefer PHP unit, you can do that as well. In the previous section, you'll find a video on how to convert a pest test to PHP unit. Right now, our package only supports Laravel 8. In the next video, we are going to take a look at how your package can support multiple versions of Laravel.